COC that has been interviewing Holocaust survivors and then turning their stories into a short animated film. And it has been shown at Holocaust museums. It's been shown, they have 4 of them now, and they have been shown at College of the Canyons. And I'd like to know, Cheryl or David, what was your reaction to it? That was the first time you've seen it.
For me, I thought it was, David is just rolling the chair in, so that's what that noise is.
Let him roll the chair in. He saw it too.
For me, it was very impressive and engaging, an engaging way to tell the story. And as far as I'm concerned, anything that helps to tell the stories of Holocaust survivors is just incredibly important. So this is done so in a different and creative way.
Interesting. Well, I'm glad to see that they are doing things like that at COC.
What was interesting to me is the survivor that they interviewed is an engineer who has been inventive and has patented things like stabilizing microphones. And he has some very important patents, a brilliant guy, and his story of running and being hidden from the Nazis was an absolute wonderful story.
And in addition to that, had 4 kids and has plenty of grandkids.
Nice.
So his genetic structure will go on because he was able to escape.
Yes.
Abraham.
I couldn't hear the last name, David.
Perlmutter.
Right.
Okay.
Abraham Perlmutter, very brilliant guy.
Well, if we get a date if we get information on how people can watch it, we'll definitely put it up. Okay.
Good. I will let the people at the college know that there's interest for it being seen again.
Good.
And so, also important in the credits of Abraham Perlmutter, Lee and Joyce Schulman.
Oh, nice.
Yes, we supported through the Patrons of the Arts at College of the Canyons. We support their efforts.
Well, thank you, and we're glad that they were able to do something important with that.
They really did.
Interesting.
They really did. The Patrons of the Arts does some wonderful things. I would like to mention 2 things before we go on. One, they made College of the Canyons an all-Steinway school, which very, very few community colleges are able to do, especially a small suburban college. We are an all-Steinway school. And in addition, our jazz groups have won national contests and perform nationally. So our 2 singing jazz groups.
Wow.
So I'm proud of the work that I've been doing, that Lee and I have been doing there.
And Rabbi, just so that you know, Joyce is just as enthusiastic about supporting you as she is the COC.
I know. Well, she is a great benefactor of arts and learning and keeping people connected to growth, human growth and potential. So
yeah,
it is really important. And
you're important as well.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. So we read last week the story of the beginning, and almost immediately we're slammed with the almost destruction, the near destruction of all of humanity. And the fact that it's back to back makes it even more dramatic and impressive and powerful and poignant that birth and destruction are literally in the next portions. And I don't think people, they don't think about that or they don't discuss it, but it kind of reminds us that there's a reminder that the difference between life and death is sometimes just a moment. And in this case, it's literally turning the page, or not even turning the page. As it so happens, it's the middle of chapter 6. So the chapter of Noah begins, Ele Toldot Noah. This is the line, or these are the generations of Noah. This is the story of Noah. Toldot means generations, but oftentimes it's kind of, the meaning of it means this is the tale. This is the story. What happens? And the last words that we read last week were, but Noah found favor with the Lord. Again, that's a positive line for the fact that the last few verses said, the Lord regretted that he made man. And the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth those things that I created. And Noah has hope. Now, it doesn't even say in last week's portion, but I'm going to save Noah, and here's how I'm going to do it. It just ends, but Noah found favor with the Lord. So it doesn't even say, it's kind of like, it's a great cliffhanger because it looks really bad, but yet there's a glimmer of hope. And then we get to the Noah story this week, and it kind of begins with this introduction to Noah. And it says in the first line that Noah was a righteous man. He was blameless in his age, and Noah walked with God. And the phrase Noah walked with God, we've seen this phrase before. We saw it with Enoch last week, that walking with God is clearly a good thing. To walk with God is good. It is an indication that he was somebody who followed the rules, was a holy person. But as we have to do every year when we read this first line of Noah, we have to point out this strange word, this word right here, bedorotav. In Hebrew, it's one word, in his generation. And 3 words in English, bedorotav. And the rabbis pointed out a long time ago that if it just said that he was a righteous man, then we would kind of walk away with, okay, so he's a good guy. And again, without rooting the story, we know Noah and his family are the only ones that get to survive. But it says in his generation, in his age. And the rabbis pointed out, well, that's because he wasn't really that great of a guy. He's okay. He's good. He's clearly better than everybody else. But in another generation, no one even would have paid attention to him. If he lived during the time of Abraham, they said, wouldn't have even known him. We wouldn't have even known who he was. It's just because he was in his generation. But keep that in mind. Why would they even get off saying that? Where on the face of it, it seems that he is, seems pretty good. He's good enough to be saved. But they don't like Noah in totality. And there's a reason, folks, why we're the descendants of Abraham. We're not we are descendants of Noah. We're also descendants of Adam. But we don't call ourselves B'nai Noah. We actually call ourselves the sons of Jacob, B'nai Yisrael. But we also kind of consider Abraham the first Jew. And we call ourselves the children of Abraham. So the question then gets to, why are we not the sons of Noah? The rabbis do refer to the B'nai Noah, and that's everybody. Everybody on the planet is a B'nai Noah. You can also say B'nai Adam, a son of man, son of Adam. But we actually oftentimes use the word Noahide, or one who's a descendant of Noah. And actually, Rabbi Sachs, who we oftentimes have been reading over the last few years, his Devar Torah this week begins, the praise accorded to Noah is unparalleled in the Tanakh. He was, says the Torah, a righteous man, perfect or blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. No such praise is given to Abraham, Moses, or the prophets. Yet it says, what he goes on saying is, Noah is the classic case of someone who is righteous but not a leader. In a disastrous age, Sachs writes, when all has been corrupted, when the world is filled with violence, and even when God himself regrets that he made man on earth, Noah alone justifies God's faith in humanity. Noah is to humanity what Abraham is to the Jewish people. Noah was a good man in a bad age. And so, again, and then he goes on to point out, I'm not going to read his whole thing, but you could and you should read what he writes about. But again, this idea that Noah is good, but only compared to everybody else around him. And we'll talk about why in a moment. What is it about him that the rabbis find, I don't know if problematic is the right word, but definitely one of the reasons why we had to condition his righteousness to his generation. So things have gone wrong. People have messed things up on the planet. And I closed the wrong thing. Sorry. I was trying to close the Rabbi Sachs article I was reading from. So let's go back to Noah. Sorry. By the way, one thing, before we get too far, let me share the screen again. Before we get too far, I want to go back to what had happened. Let's read a couple more lines and we're going to go back. So it says that Noah, let me get this up there. Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japhet. And the earth became corrupt before God. The earth was filled with lawlessness. When God saw how corrupt the earth was, for all flesh had corrupted its ways on earth, God said to Noah, I have decided to put an end to all flesh, for all the earth is filled with lawlessness because of them. I am about to destroy them with the earth. So you can see that God is literally saying, it's not just human beings, but everything has gone bad. Like the animals, the earth, everything has gone bad. I've got to start over. So it's almost again that God says the whole thing is not working. And of course, I mean, what didn't work is it says all flesh had corrupted its way on earth. So this kind of gets back to this issue of creation. Because again, especially in this version, and I will say, and I don't want to dwell on it, there are 2 versions of the creation story. And they're slightly different. They're slightly different, these versions. And they're woven together. As I said before, it's not like the creation story where you have one version in chapter 1 and one version in chapter 2. In the Noah story in chapters 6 and 7 and 8, the stories go back and forth. They're woven together. There's a chapter, there's no chapter break that breaks them up nicely. So let's talk about creation for just 1 minute before we get into the end of the reboot, if you will, creation 2.0. So Harvey had an interesting question about last week, which I think again bears well into this week. How do those who read the Bible as fundamentalists, as literalists, how do they make sense of the creation stories, especially again to these issues of how long things take for them to develop? Whether it's 7 days literally, or is it 7 steps? Part of it has to do with the dating. Part of it has to do with fossils and kind of what we've learned about with science. Harvey, do you want to say anything before I kind of get into this? Harvey, you there?
Your mic is mute.
Yeah, you're off. You're off.
Okay, there we go. No, I've been thinking about it that, God created in 7 days, and as you said, is it 7 days or 7 periods? I can accept that part where a period could be 100,000 years, the creation. But then you look back on the evolution end of it, that people find fossils, they find dinosaurs, the Neanderthal men, and why did they die out? And where did they play into creation? And then I go back to thinking, at one point, somewhere, something created life. Was that God? Probably, maybe. And then you're reading now, as science gets better, that there's life possibly on another planet. Is that a different God? So there's a lot of things that in my mind are counteracting reading this and trying to understand at what point was creation? Was it with a single atom? And how did that create? Who created the single atom? And then again, you go to Mars or you go to X planet and they discover water and maybe life. Is that a different God? So there's a lot of questions in my mind.
Yeah. And so you specifically got to this issue of, so how do people who read this, and again, it goes into this next issue of how do we read the Noah story and what we see in the Noah story? How does that play out too, with what we know from archaeology and from history and stuff like that. Now, I will tell you that obviously people get hung up on this. I don't know what to say other than you're not supposed to get too hung up on it, because even thousands of years ago, the rabbis recognized that what we're reading about here, even though they they took it at face value 2,000 years ago, they understood that the Torah wasn't really dealing with, physical, the details of how these things come into play. They knew that. The rabbis saw that this crazy discrepancy, we've talked about it before, that there's one chapter about the creation of the universe, but 3 chapters detailing the creation of the ark and the tabernacle. So clearly, there's so much more detail about the creation of a sacred space that we had. What does that say about creation? And I would say one of the things it says is that the Torah is not that concerned in telling the story of how creation happened, and maybe not concerned at all about how creation happened. There is a concern, and again, it's not a huge concern, but there is an issue of why we came into being. And as I said before last week, the Torah is really concerned with the whys, not with the hows, the whats, the wheres, the whens. They are concerned with the why. And they actually warned people not to spend a lot of time dwelling on those other pieces of it, the hows and the whens. What happened before? Those kind of questions.
All
What?
history and all peoples and all tribes and countries talk about the flood, have written about the flood, have
Yeah.
stories about the flood. So obviously that did happen.
And creation, again, just to finish up with
It
creation,
happened.
creation definitely happened. We're here. There's a
Yeah.
universe. There's things here, and so this is every culture also had, as Joy said, they had a flood story, and every culture had a creation story.
Right.
For every one of them, and usually those creation stories, folks, were myths to explain why things are the way they are.
Yes.
Why do we, why not necessarily why is there a universe? Though the rabbis do kind of ask that question too. Why do we even have a universe? But they basically come to the conclusion, we don't know. It probably doesn't even make sense. But but they also, every culture wanted to explain it. And Judaism, our version of these stories basically says that God wanted us to be here for a reason. And I would also argue to some extent that until we can figure out how to live here on this planet without killing each other, until we figure that stuff out, it's going to be really hard for us to address these other issues. I don't want to put it as I don't want to say negatively, but as kind of controversially as this, but figuring out cosmology and those kind of things is a luxury when you're not worried about whether you can survive or not.
Mhm.
And for a lot of human history, people just had to figure out how to survive. I mean, I'll just give you a very easy example. Again, going back to the Holocaust. Albert Einstein could have wound up in a concentration camp. The fact that he helped obviously develop the atom bomb, which helped end the war, was something that he was able to do as an American. But on another level, he could have been in a concentration camp trying to figure out how to live, let alone how the universe exists. It's a luxury that he almost didn't have. The fact that he ended up getting to spend the rest of his life at Princeton University was because a lot of people in America realized that he had tremendous value to our country. That's just one example, but it's a very real example from 70 years ago, 80 years ago. It's not from 2,000 years ago.
Mhm.
So I think that to put it mildly, we still have a little work to go before we can get to a point where we have the luxury of kind of thinking about what happened before and whether there's life on other planets. I mean, look, I'm interested in it. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to have answers to these questions, but we also have a whole lot of work in front of us not to wind up like Noah is, which is two seconds away from dying. I mean, literally, if he doesn't get on the ark, he's gone too.
Mhm.
So there's an interesting idea here that Judaism kind of gives us. Why get hung up on the argument over how the world actually came into being when we can't even figure out how to get along on the planet with each other and with everything that we have here that God gave us. So we got to live in better balance with the planet and with each other, and that's what we're trying to figure out how to do. And that is a theme you're going to see in Genesis. But to specifically answer Harvey's question, how do creationists deal with this? There's two basic answers, which is they either say, look, God planted fossils and planted things that go contrary to the Bible so that there will be doubt, and that to test us and to make sure that we don't give up faith. That's one line, which isn't very popular within Judaism, but is in especially some fundamentalist Christian teachings. I'm not saying all, but there you will find it there occasionally. This kind of conspiracy theory that God does this to test us. And then there's another answer, which is again a little bit more common in the Christian world and in the Orthodox Jewish world, which is that the stories are written in a way so that we can't quite understand them, but that again the easy answer would be a day for God is 1,000,000 years. And so when God says there is one day, that this is a different computation of time. And it's something that I talked to Joyce about when we read about people living for 969 years. Is that meant to be taken literally? And I do think that our ancestors did mean it literally. I think that the numbers added up to certain things that were things that they saw as symbolic. I think that those numbers were not an accident. I don't think, again, we don't know all of them. It's hard to necessarily know what all of those numbers represent. But I do believe that in the stories, they understood things the way they understood them. I don't fault our ancestors for not understanding, everything that we know, just like I hope our descendants don't fault us for not understanding everything that they're going to know.
Mhm.
So let's be careful in our judgment of our ancestors, lest in 5,000 years people laugh at us for our ignorance. So I'm hoping that we will know a lot more, in the future, and that we're still learning. Harvey, was that some answer?
No, it was, and I understand it, and I agree with what you're saying. It's thoughts, because years ago we were in Ireland, and some of the things we saw in Ireland that goes back thousands of years, where they developed a cave and they developed the light that only shines in on the winter solstice or the summer. Now, how did they develop that? And how many years did it take to do that? They didn't
Yeah.
develop it in 1 year. So I know things take a long time. I guess my issue in my mind is I can't conceive of thousands of years because I'm not even living 100 years.
Well, I hope you live 100 years. Your
Well, my
mother-in-law,
mom had, my mother-in-law has, so I hope
your
I.
mother-in-law has, so
Yeah.
it's possible. But
But no,
I
I
do,
understand. I agree.
I do think there is something interesting though, which is that you just pointed out, that when you look at some of those things that measured time, and some of the things that were, like Stonehenge, or things in the Egyptian, some of the Egyptian pyramids and some of those structures, when you realize that those were created over hundreds of years, in some cases thousands of years, you realize that people, and you see it in the Torah, this sense of collective responsibility that goes through the generations. It's not just one generation that's responsible for something. They understood that in some cases things take generations to accomplish. Today, we get frustrated if we don't get something done in 2 weeks. If you don't have an answer, immediately on something, we get frustrated and angry if we don't get immediate response, for everything. And we do amazing things, but there also are things that sometimes take years and years to bring to fruition, and it needs time. It's not something that can be rushed. People talk about, a scotch that needs to be aged for 15 years. There actually are things that can't be rushed, that they will not be good before 15 years. You can't use a technology to get to make that happen. And it's the same thing with life. I mean, you can't, and people try to rush their children through their childhood and get them to know algebra by the time they're 5 or something. You can't do that. There are things that need time, and some things need generations. So it's hard. We live in a time when we don't even want to wait a generation, let alone a week. So a week is too long for us. So it's dangerous. It's actually dangerous, the pace that we work at, and that we expect things to happen, because the things need time to set. Anyways, so back to Noah, and again, the fact that this one line gives us so much to think about, and we haven't even gotten back to the point of why is Noah not the fully righteous or developed, say righteous, the fully developed individual that our ancestors, our sages, wanted him to be. So Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And it says earth was corrupt, lawless, and flesh, everything was bad. Everything was bad. And God says, make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make it an ark with compartments, and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. And again, a cubit is about 1.5 feet. So again, the ark is about 450 feet long. So it makes it about, 150 yards. Well, not 150 yards, but, anyways, it's
150 yards.
yeah, 150 yards. Yeah. It's not a ship, by the way, folks. And it's never called a ship. There is a boat. There's a word for a boat or a ship in Hebrew. It's called an ark. It's called a teva, which is the same word that's used for the basket that Moses was put in. It's basically something that floats that doesn't have oars, or sails, or rudder even. It's a floating bowl, if you will. This is long. I mean, it's obviously a narrow, more like a ship, but it doesn't say that there's anything on it that can make it go in any direction. It's not direction. Make an opening for daylight in the ark, and terminate it with a cubit of the top, put the entrance to the ark on its side, make it with bottom, second, and third decks. For my part, I'm about to bring the flood, waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh under the sky in which there is breath of life. Everything on earth shall perish. But I will establish my covenant with you. You shall enter the ark with your sons, your wife, your sons' wives, and all that lives of all flesh. You shall take 2 of each into the ark to keep alive with you. And they shall be male and female. From birds of every kind, cattle of every kind of creeping thing on earth, 2 of each shall come to you to stay alive. For your part, take everything that is eaten, of everything that is eaten, and store it away to serve as food for you and them. And Noah did, just as God commanded him, so he did. And that is what the phrase says, actually, in Hebrew. Noah did what God said. Ken asa. He did it. So the word did is used there twice. Commanded, used there. What's missing from this discussion, conversation? Somebody. What's missing from this? It's not a conversation. It's not a discussion. Noah doesn't say anything. And this is where the rabbis get him and say, there's something wrong here. He never says why. He never says to God, do you have to destroy everything? He never says, why me? Is anybody else okay? Is my cousin okay? Is my nephew okay? Nothing about any other person on the whole world. Noah's silent. Now he's righteous and blameless in the sense that he seems to be really good at taking orders. But again, this is the point that Sachs makes, that the rabbis make thousands of years ago, which is he's righteous, he's good, but he's not a leader.
Yeah, contrast Noah with Jonah. Jonah's really getting into it with God. Really letting God have it, if you will.
Yep.
Noah does nothing.
And we don't even have to wait. We don't even have to wait for Jonah, because we get it in 2 chapters, in 2 portions from now. We get it when we see Abraham. Abraham immediately argues with God, and we're going to see it in 12 chapters from now, in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Abraham says to God, you can't destroy those cities. There might be good people there. Those are cities. Those are like a few thousand people. This is the entire planet. And Noah's not even stepping up for anybody. Keeps his head down and he does what God tells him to do. But Abraham argues with God. And the rabbis recognize that this is the point. And so this is where he's blameless only in his age, which is, again, we're not the sons of Noah. We're the sons and daughters of Abraham and Sarah. We're the sons and daughters of Jacob, because we had to get to a point where humanity would say to God, no, wait a second, this isn't right. And this is the difference. It's not just listening to God. It's actually realizing that we're partners with God, that if God wanted us in this world and God created us for a purpose, then part of that purpose is to take care of other people, not just to take care of ourselves. Because an animal will save itself. The animal will also save its family. A human being in its best, highest edition, will try to save their neighbor too. And that's not what Noah's doing. And so the rabbis fault him for that. Now I will tell you, and so we always have to share this. And I talked about it with the kids. I had my teenagers earlier this year. Today, 4 hours ago. So we always talk about this and what we can learn about this and to be a leader and to stand up for people. But we also say, look, it's easy to fault Noah and say, you should have done more. You should have done something. But the rabbis argue that Noah was really not so great. He's okay, he's good, he's not great. But one of the rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda, said to the rest of the rabbis, said, wait a second. Okay, Noah wasn't great. But how hard is it to be good when everyone else is doing bad? How much courage does it take to go against the tide and say, no, that's not right? And I'm not going to get political. I'm not going to talk about because it happens in every party and it happens in every group of people. It happens in every generation, that there's examples of people who say, you know what, you're wrong. I'm not going along with this.
Rabbi, this is where, when I was in Hebrew school, I had a real break with Judaism because I got really angry and just didn't buy this part. And I just remember really rebelling. This story all brings it back to why I got so angry and just thought, Noah, this is all BS, and I'm not going with it. Well, it really pissed me off.
Well, so hopefully somebody would have pointed out that traditionally we have a problem with Noah doing this. But the counter argument is, when people do bad and you don't do bad, how much harder? And the example, and I can't unfortunately talk to the kids about this now because, well, first of all, they're a little young, this group, but also it's now unfortunately oldie times. But when I'm talking to little older kids, and definitely when we can talk about the Holocaust, I tell them, listen, there was a great movie made. One of the greatest movies about the Holocaust period is Schindler's List. Mm-hmm. And the reason that it's such a powerful movie is that it focuses on this guy, Oskar Schindler, who Spielberg makes sure that we all understand, not a good man. He's not a good husband. He's not a good business person. He's not a good individual on a day-to-day level. But he did something heroic, and he was a Nazi. And so he was a member of the Nazi party. But whatever, he did it. He was a member of the Nazis. He joined because he had to, whatever you want to say. But yet he risked his life and he did something in his generation that was righteous. And this is an example of somebody who does buck the trend and say, you know what? I'm not going to go with the flow. I'm not going to do what everyone else is doing, because it's easy to do that. And I don't have to stick my neck out and I don't have to risk my life. But yet, and so Rabbi Judah's point was, how much harder is it to be a good person when everyone else is being bad? Don't just say, well, he wasn't such a great person. Okay, but let's look at being good. And I talk to the teens about this, not so much now about, like I said, the Schindler's example, but for young kids that are just about to enter into high school, I tell them, look, peer pressure is one of the worst parts of being a teen. And it's so hard to stand up and say, look, I'm not going to do that because it's going to hurt me, or it's going to put myself at risk, or it's going to jeopardize everybody else. To be a teen when peer pressure is so tough and not to do something that even is bad and it's dangerous and it could be detrimental to your long-term health, safety, success, to go against that takes a lot of courage. And I tell kids that, don't be afraid to have courage, because Judaism actually wants us to stand up and to stick our necks out. And again, maybe Noah did it for himself, but sometimes you have to do it for yourself. Sometimes sticking your neck out is going to actually save your life. It may not save everybody else's life. It maybe will save only your life. But sometimes you going along with what everyone else is doing, you could wind up getting killed. And we all know that. I mean, all of us know horrible stories about teens who made a bad decision on what car to get into, or what they decided to put in their bodies, or whatever the example is. I mean, you fill in the blank. But I tell kids there's a lot to learn from Noah for you, and that the story is really relevant. I mean, Philip, hopefully, somebody at some point would teach teens that, look, the Noah story is a good lesson because it teaches us to stand up on one hand for what we believe in, but it also teaches us that, you know what, it does take courage to be that person that's going to not go along with what everybody else was doing. Because if he had, Noah would have been gone. We wouldn't be here.
It takes
So-
courage, and it takes training, and it takes training in value system. And in knowing that a child even can use good judgment. I'd like to tell you a story of my youngest daughter. I heard her on the phone once. Every time she was getting ready to do something, I told her, use your judgment. Do you want to eat this or that? Use your judgment. Oh, darling, you have good judgment. I heard her on the phone one day. She was only 8 years old. I don't know what the other kid was asking her. All I heard her say was, I can't do that. I have good judgment. And the lesson, I mean, we all broke up over it, but the lesson of using judgment apparently took.
Yeah. Well, it's good. And it's good to instill that within them so that they don't have to be told what to do, but to say, we're going to make a good decision on our own. But look, I mean, we all know it. Peer pressure is so hard on kids.
It is.
And it's very hard for them to do even what they know is right because it gets so intense. And that gets to another issue, which is unfortunate, which sometimes it's just kids are in a really bad environment. And we do what we can as parents, as family members, whatever, to try to have them be in the right situation. But sometimes it's just a bad group they fall in with. And I mean, I've seen kids go to jail who I know, I mean, I can't, how do I prove it? You can't prove it, but I'm almost positive that if they'd been in a different environment, if they'd been with a different group of friends, they wouldn't have wound up doing those things. I just know it. I mean, I know it in my gut that this is a person who was literally just in a bad environment. And again, that doesn't excuse it. I'm just saying it's tragic how, because of just being not, sometimes it's not even being in the wrong geographical area. It's just the wrong cohort that happened to be in that geographical area at that time. It's just sometimes it's a fluke, but it's terrible. And it's very, very sad how, and people have done studies on it, psychological studies on it. Peer pressure is almost impossible to overcome. Even if you have a good background, even if your parents are, instilled with you, in you good values and all those things, it's so hard. It's one of the hardest things to fight is peer pressure. So it's hard. It's a hard thing for teens. And so I always use this as an opportunity when we read this story to tell them, you may find yourself in a really hard situation once, but if you know that this is wrong, don't do it. You have to be able to step up because it's a life or death issue. And I mean, it can be a life or death issue, which it is for Noah. And to some extent, humanity hangs in the balance with Noah. If Noah doesn't buck the trend, then everybody's gone. So anyways, that's the two ways of looking at Noah's righteous in his generation.
Mhm.
Let's continue. Now we're going to get into the main part of the story, the part that's the part that everybody likes, the part of the animals and those kind of things, and the rain. And I will tell you, again, this is an example of where when you look at the authorship issue, it answers more questions and it actually helps reading this. Because when people read this and go, why does it say it there and this there and that? Because there's two different strands that are woven together. Calm down. It's okay. It's not, it's still a beautiful story. And if you read it separately, it makes even more sense. But here's what happens in chapter 7. The Lord said to Noah, go into the ark with all your household. For you alone I found righteous before me in this generation. Again, that kind of the same phrase, Bedor Hazeh, which again, as you notice, the previous line says God, and then this line says no, Lord. So it really goes back to this line right here. Noah was a righteous man. Boom. That's probably where that ended originally with that. And then here's the second version of it. Again, I just calm down. I mean, I don't just trust me. If you say, well, we just heard that, different time. Of every clean animal, you shall take 7 pairs, males and their mate, and of every clean animal that is not clean, 2, a male and its mate. Okay, well, there are 7 pairs of the clean animals, the animals that you'd sacrifice or that you'd eat, that are kosher, if you will. It doesn't say that, but it says tahor, the ones that are clean. That's why they translated that. And then for the unclean ones, the ones that are tame, you take 2. Of the birds of the sky also 7 pairs, male and female, to keep seed alive upon all the earth. For in 7 days I will rain upon earth 40 days and 40 nights. I will blot out the earth from all existence that I created. And Noah did just as the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years when the flood came, waters upon the earth. Noah with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Of the clean animals, of the animals that are not clean, of the birds and of everything that creeps on ground, 2 of each, male and female, came into the ark as God had commanded Noah. So there,
We're back to God.
and we're back to God, and we're back to 2. It doesn't have the 7 and 2 anymore. And on the 7th day, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. And as I said, it goes back and forth, one verse in the next verse. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst apart, and the floodgates of the sky broke open. The rain fell on earth 40 days and 40 nights. That same day, Noah and Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, went into the ark with Noah's wives and the 3 wives of his sons. And all the beasts of every kind, and all the cattle of every kind, and all and of every kind that creep on the earth, and on birds of every kind, every bird, every winged thing. They came into the ark, 2 of each, all flesh. There was breath of life. Thus they that entered comprised male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded. And then it says, and the Lord shut him in. So there you have God and the Lord in the same phrase. The flood continued 40 days on the earth, and the waters increased and raised the ark so that it rose above the earth. The waters swelled and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark drifted upon the waters. When the waters had swelled much more upon the earth, all the highest mountains everywhere under the sky were covered. 15 cubits higher did the water swell. So that's 45 feet, about 50 feet. All the mountains were covered. And all the flesh that stirred on earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts and all the things that swarmed on the earth and all mankind. All in whose nostrils were the merest breath of life, all that was on dry land died. All existence on earth was blotted out. Man, cattle, creeping thing, and birds of the sky, they were blotted from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him on the ark. And the waters had swelled on the earth 150 days. So again, some people say, why does it say 40 days and 40 nights? Another place it says 150 days. The traditional answer is it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. The other version, and when it says 150, it just means the water stayed on the earth for another 110 days. Look, there's clearly a version. There's 2 versions of the story. And in one of those versions, the waters were there for 150 days, and they opened up when the fountains of the great deep burst apart and the floodgates of the sky opened. A reversal of day 2 of creation, which is different than saying the water fell for 40 days and 40 nights. One version of the story basically has water coming up from the ground and literally the skies opening up. This is not just rain. in this version. It's literally the water just falls from the sky, like all of it. It's an unzipping of the rakia. We just read about the firmament and on the creation of day 2. This is, it erases. The firmament pulls back like a retractable roof. It gets unzipped, whatever you want to say, whatever it's just water everywhere. It's an unzipping of that. And the other one, the rain falls for 40 days and 40 nights. So here's how it stops. God remembered Noah and all the beasts on the earth, and on all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark. And God caused a wind to blow across the earth, and the waters subsided. Sounds a little bit like, again, the first creation story with God over the waters of the earth. The fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were stopped up, and the rain was held back. Then the waters receded steadily from the earth. At the end of 150 days, the waters diminished. So in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest at Ararat. The waters went on diminishing until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st of the month, the tops of the mountains became visible. So again, this is all part of one author who's basically saying, how did the waters recede after 150 days? And what time of year it was too, by the way. Notice that they're talking about that. Now this is where people then start flipping out. But don't flip out. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and went and sent out a raven. It went to and fro until the waters had dried up from the earth. Folks, the easy answer is that's the other author. That's the J author who has 40 days of water. He also has a raven doing the work. Notice, by the way, the raven actually does the work. That is a raven of great power, of great myth. Ravens in some cultures were seen as spirit animals, especially Native American traditions. In this one, the raven actually is a partner in fixing everything. What's interesting is because of the way the story was woven together, people usually write the raven out of the story in a negative way and saying, look at the raven. It didn't do anything. It's not like the dove. The way the story seems to originally be intended, the raven actually does part of the work. It went to and fro. The raven is like making the waters go back, and like the waters are following the raven as it goes back and forth. Then he sent out the dove to see whether the waters had decreased from the surface of the ground. But the dove could not find a resting place for its foot and returned to him to the ark, for there was water all over the earth. So putting out his hand, he took it with him. That's the dove story, folks. Comes right after the raven story, where it seems like at the end of the raven story, it was dry. But the dove could not find a resting place, comes back, right? He waited another 7 days and sent the dove out from the ark. The dove went back and forth toward evening, and then in its bill it was plucked an olive leaf. Then Noah knew the waters had decreased on the earth. He waited 7 more days, and the dove went forth and did not return anymore. That is the dove story. The two stories were woven together next to each other. Stories about birds and birds being involved in the flood. Raven and dove. But the funny thing is because the stories are juxtaposed to each other, the one thing that people take away from it is, look at that raven. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't come back to the ark. He doesn't help. Not so. The raven originally seems to be really important to it. It's just next to the dove, he doesn't do this 3-step process where the dove comes back, then it comes back with a leaf, and then it doesn't come back at all. They're both nice stories, and they're both nice birds. But when they're juxtaposed next to each other, the raven doesn't look like he's a helper. Now we go back to the other version, again, with in the 601st year, in the first of the month, on the first of the month, in the first month, on the first day of the month, so on Rosh Hashanah, the waters began to dry from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark he saw the surface of the ground was drying, and in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. And God said to Noah, come out of the ark, together with your wives and your sons' wives. Bring out every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds, animals, everything that creeps on earth. And let them swarm on the earth and be fertile and increase on the earth. And there we go back to those words, pru or vu, be fertile and multiply. So it's what they were told at the very beginning of this of the Bible, to be fruitful and multiply. So this is a great kind of reminder. Get back to what you were. Go back. We're going to come back out, and we're going to get back to starting to populate the world again. Folks, notice Noah doesn't come out of the ark until God tells him to come out of the ark. So regardless of which bird does it, regardless of what Noah learns and sees and observes and sees that there's dry land and knows from the olive leaf and no dove, whatever, he knows that it's dry, but he doesn't come out of the ark. And there's another really important lesson there, which you may never have known or never have seen before in the story of Noah, which is, for some reason, I don't think it's hard to understand, Noah's not quite ready to come out of the ark. You'd think he runs out of the ark as soon as he can, right? Your first instinct is, oh, we're on dry land. Let's get out of here. Let's get out of the ark. Been here for 40 days, 150 days, however many days. It's a long time. He doesn't come out of the ark. And it's this interesting kind of idea that after seeing such devastation, after being traumatized by this cataclysmic event, Noah didn't want to come out. Noah wasn't rushing to get out. He was maybe scared. And this is what happens when someone's gone through trauma, when they've gone through this situation of having their freedoms taken away or being held hostage. It's not so easy to come back out. Why do I pause here at this to let you think a little bit? Why am I letting you think about this for a second? This year, this time we read Noah. Why am I talking about this right now?
Because many of us are in isolation and we're staying in.
And so the question is going to be, Joyce, when people have the opportunity and the protocol and the vaccine and this and the statistics and this and that, how many people are not going to come out of their houses quick?
I've heard people say they'll never fly again, not wanting to go to New York. There are people that are reluctant to resume old activities.
Yep. So I tell you this now, and again, I don't want to be a prophet on this, but I want to tell you, I'm not saying myself, I'm ready to go back out tomorrow. I'm not one, to stay in the house, but there are going to be a lot of people that do not get back to productivity or back to life or whatever you want to say. I don't want to make judgments on it, but there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be very hesitant to get back out.
And that may move into depression.
Yeah. And I think people are going to get into a frame of mind, not just of being comfortable in their ark, but I think that they're also scared. And I think that they've been conditioned now and I'm very worried about what's going to happen with younger people, younger kids who've gone through this. I don't mean younger kids who won't remember this that well, but my daughter and people who are, teenagers and early teens. I'm wondering what this is going to do to their understanding of how to engage with the world. And I'm very worried that this is, and again, I'm not arguing that it shouldn't have been done, and I'm not arguing that lockdowns are this or that. I'm just telling you, there is a consequence to this that is we're going to need to help each other, and we're going to have to help kids we're going to have to invest in some very serious mental health initiatives to help kids come back out of the ark. And I don't want to, again, I'm not saying how long it should be or what needs to happen first. And I don't, I'm just hoping it's soon. But I'm telling you, don't think that when this is all over and you say, oh, you remember when we were all locked down? There are going to be people who are still living in lockdown mode. And it is another issue of something that I hope we don't. I'm pretty sure I'm right about it, and I hope I'm wrong, that we won't sweep this under the rug and try to move on like we didn't just go through something that was. And again, I know people did it in 100 years ago. They got through the Spanish influenza and they got back onto life and everything else. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they did it in the right way. It doesn't also mean that it didn't lead to other psychological trauma that nobody talked about 100 years ago. And so I think we have to be honest about it. And I think we have to have discussions about it. And I think we have to be prepared to provide the support, especially for young people, but for everybody who needs it. But especially for young people, they need to have access to mental health professionals who will help them deal with reintegrating and getting back to interactions that we would consider to be normal societal interactions. I'm just telling you, it's not going back to normal, folks.
Well, the roaring 20s that happened after the Spanish flu of the 1918, 1919, the roaring 20s was an age not only of celebration, but it was also of lawlessness. So we're going through 9 months, 10 months of no shuls, no synagogues, no churches, no going to sporting events, no schools. People don't know how to behave as a social entity anymore.
Yeah, I'm just telling you, you're right. And so there was a period where people, and again, they also emerged out of a world war that was devastating. Right. So I hope we're honest about it. I hope we don't, like I said, I hope we don't think that there's not going to be a cost to this, and that this is something that we can just move on from and say, oh, thank God that's in the past. There's a consequence to this. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping we take that into account, and before we spend all of our money on, and again, I'm saying it's not going to be necessary to stimulate and to get parts of the economy moving again at a good pace, but we better hold some money back for therapy and for mental health, especially for those who don't normally have it or have access to it or have traditions of relying on it, of talking to professionals and to having. I mean, I got news for you. What I would like to see happen out of this is having schools have mandatory times where they set aside, not say, well, if they want to, but to make sure that kids are okay, that kids are not, that kids are getting back somehow, to have professionals that are there seeing that they're getting back into their outside activities, that they're getting back into a routine, that they have a healthy home life. We don't know what's going on right now. So I'm hoping I'm hoping that in all the rush to spend money, that some money is held back for mental health. Because we don't, obviously, we've talked about it many times, we don't treat it seriously enough as it is. And right now we have a crisis going on that we haven't even seen the crisis, the mental health crisis, after it's done. So let's hope that we're sensitive enough to each other and that we're responsible enough as a society to deal with this. So that's my arc lecture for tonight. But I mean, in all seriousness, we're on an arc right now, folks. We're not out of the arc.
Right.
We're not out of the arc. What's so funny about this is we got a pet just at the right time. We brought in at least one pet. We got her the rabies shots today, so that was the big deal. Is we took her out to the vet. So that's why we're doing the pet service Saturday, 10 o'clock. We bring those pets.
How's Ryder doing?
Ryder is doing really good. Thank God. I think we got a good one. Good. We got one that is calm. That is. We have to take him out 3 o'clock every night to go to the bathroom, and I'm not going to complain about it, but I am going to complain about it. I can't go back to, I don't do it, by the way. I told Shira and Tracy that this is your dog. Don't get me in. I'm not roped into doing this, but I wake up anyways, and I can't go back to sleep after it. Tracy goes right back to sleep after the 3 o'clock walk. I can't. So, I mean, we're just walking them outside. We're not walking around the block, but we're taking them out to the bathroom. That's the hardest part of this right now is I'm not sleeping good. It's like having a baby.
Right.
And this baby won't be taking care of me when I'm older, but that's another, I don't make a judgment about the dog. But anyways, so Noah is on board with these dogs and cats and lions and everything else. And of course, people wonder, how do they eat on that ark? Well, listen, up until this time, all we've heard about in Genesis is that animals and people are eating vegetables or grains. They're eating seed-bearing vegetation, actually. So it says, bring them all out, everything that creeps on earth, and let them swarm on the earth. Let all the animals come out too. So Noah came out with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives, and every animal, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that stirs on the earth came out of the ark by families. And then Noah builds an altar to the Lord, and taking of every clean animal and every clean bird, he offered up burnt offerings on the altar. So some of those animals didn't last too long in the new world. I would say, gosh, we're on the ark and you saved us for this. And now we're going on the altar. But that's why they had 7 pairs of those animals, because as soon as they got out, they made a sacrifice. And it says the Lord smelled the pleasing odor. And the Lord said to himself, never again will I doom the earth because of man. I'm not going to do this anymore. Why? Not because not because they've changed. God changed. God says, since the devising of man's mind are evil from his youth, nor will I ever again destroy every living being as I have done. They can't help themselves. I can't expect them to do better. So I'm not going to hold them up to this level of what I expected them to be like. I'm not going to destroy them anymore. It's almost like God is saying, this is the best I got. And so God changes.
Might as well keep these.
God changes. And so then God says, so as long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So I'm not going to change the way things go anymore. I'm not going to undo it. I'm not going to do that. Not that they won't, but I'm not. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, again, be fertile and increase and fill the earth. So they're told again, pru, go and multiply. Now, here we get to a very important part of the text. Usually people don't pay that much attention to this part, but I do, and I think it's real important.
Rabbi,
Yes.
so God said to be fertile and multiply, but he had 3 sons.
Yes.
But they had wives.
So now they're allowed to have, they didn't have kids. Assumedly, his kids hadn't had kids yet. I mean, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that they didn't, but it doesn't say that they had kids. So assumedly now those 3 families are going to go out. And we're actually going to see what they do in the next chapter. So they're now given permission. Their kids are. By the way, not that I'm encouraging people to watch the movie, but when that movie Noah came out a few years ago with Russell Crowe, there's an interesting issue, which is that Noah actually doesn't want to repopulate the earth. That Noah actually tries to kill his own family when they try to procreate. And it's based on this midrash, based on this understanding, Mike, that Noah wouldn't have done it. As a matter of fact, the way the movie portrays it, Russell Crowe says, I know that we are evil people by nature. And I don't want there to be any more people here on earth. And so there's actually this very dramatic scene where Noah tries to kill, what's her name? Emma Watson? Whoever his daughter-in-law is in there, I forget her name. He tries to kill her when he finds out she's pregnant. because he doesn't want the people to be fruitful and multiply. So that's kind of based on this midrash that Noah didn't want to have any more kids. Interestingly enough, we're not sure whether Noah wanted to have more kids himself, though, Mike. But the kids are definitely able now to have kids. Noah, Shem, and Japhet. I mean, Ham, Shem, and Japhet are able to have kids. But here we get to this very important part, folks. The fear and the dread of you shall be upon all the beasts of the earth. I hear my family downstairs going crazy, Mike, so I know what's happening. So, the fear of and dread of you shall be on all the beasts of the earth, and upon all the birds of the sky, everything which is on the earth, upon all the fish of the sea. They're given to you, and they're given into our hand. This is where human beings are given permission to eat meat, with conditions. Every creature that lives shall be yours to eat, as with the green grasses. I give you all these. You must not, however, eat flesh with its lifeblood in it. For of your own lifeblood I will require a reckoning. I will require it of every beast of man too. Will I require a reckoning of human life for every man of that of his fellow man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in his image did God make man. Be fertile, again, increase and abound on the earth and increase on it. So God says to them, God says, you can eat meat now.
But don't drink blood.
Don't have their blood. Don't have the blood in the meat. Which, by the way, when I study this with people today, they go, well, who does that? Well, people used to do that pretty frequently. And there are still cultures where that's common. There are people who that's part of their diet is the blood in the animal blood. You know, we understand that eating meat with blood in it, or food that's meat that's uncooked, is a great way to get sick. So we don't usually do that, but there are cultures that do. There are cultures that still eat some pretty funky meat. Again, back to our own situation right now, folks, we're sitting in our homes right now because of crazy food markets in China.
Mm-hmm.
This is real. And I talked about this years ago when I did my sermon about vegetarianism. I talked about this 13 years ago because we had already had SARS. We had already had avian flu. We'd already had diseases that were caused by animal-human viruses. Folks, this is a serious issue, and it's a global health crisis. And again, I don't know. I don't have the easy answer on this. I don't know how you stop these things from happening, but there has to be a consequence to the fact that people shouldn't be able to eat a pangolin in China if the health effect of it is going to cause a global meltdown. I don't know what to tell you other than I don't know how many times it has to happen for people to say, what are we doing? And I don't hear anybody talking about that. Again, I know we have big issue we have to still come up with a vaccine. I get it. But we also have to stop this from happening again.
Yes.
And so people have to say, look, if you want to live like this, if you want to eat animals and have meat markets that are going to cause health crises, then you can't participate. We're not going to have flights that go to your country. We're not going to have markets open to you if you can't keep your country's health and the world's health by extension a priority. So again, this is a real issue, and now we're reading it. Hopefully, it speaks to us in a real way. So there's another condition here too. So not to have blood. There's another condition, or I wouldn't say condition, but this seems to be contingent on something else, which is that somehow with eating animals, people will somehow also not want to kill other people. There seems to be an understanding that up until this moment, if somebody killed somebody, there was no eye for an eye, life for life. That this eating of animals is, number one, going to satiate some type of bloodlust that human beings have. And number two, that if it doesn't, then you will kill the people that are killing other people. That's what it says. Whoever sheds the blood of a man will be killed. And so it seems as though up until that point, and we don't know because we only have the story of Cain and Abel, but in this Cain and Abel story, Cain clearly is not killed. Actually, God prevents him from being killed, if you will, by marking him. That somehow now the system is, you can kill animals if you want to shed blood, but you don't kill humans. And if you do, you're going to pay the ultimate price for that. So you can't draw blood you can't draw human blood. You can't drink animal blood. And there's another thing here, which I hope you caught. Get to eat animals. Now you were given permission, or not permission, you were given dominion over the animals right away. In chapter 1 of Genesis, we're given dominion over animals. But there's another thing that happens here too, folks. I hope you saw it. You see it there? The fear and the dread of you shall be upon all the beasts of the earth and on the animals, the birds of the sky, everything. The fear and dread of you. Animals are going to be frightened. So people say, how could Noah have gotten all these animals into the ark? Animals don't come to people and run up to them and jump in. Oh, dogs do, right? That's why we like them. But they're like the exception.
Right.
Most animals smell us, sense us, and they go the opposite direction, unless they know they're going to get fed by us, right? If we see squirrels that live in the park or in the wherever, they know that human beings are going to feed them. But most animals are scared of us. They have an instinct to be afraid of us because they know they could wind up on our tables. So there's an exchange here, folks. There's a cost here, which is the life that we had before, where animals, assumedly all animals, lived in peace with humans. Not anymore. You can eat them, but they'll be scared of you. I didn't like that, by the way. So when I read all this as an adult and kind of took it to heart, you know what I said to myself? 26 years ago this week, this October, after reading this portion for the 50th time or whatever it was by that point, I'm not going to eat animals anymore. I decided this week, 26 years ago, when I read Noah, I'm done eating animals. I said, God clearly didn't want human beings to eat animals in the first place. He allowed us to eat animals so that we wouldn't shed blood. That's not working out so well. We still seem to be shedding a lot of blood. And I've never wanted to kill anybody. Well, I shouldn't say that, but I've never really wanted to kill anybody. And I think I can give up eating animals and still be a even-keeled person. And so I did it. Just I didn't stop eating beef and then stop eating chicken and stop eating fish. I just said no more. I'm not going to kill any more animals. And that was the last day that I ever ate an animal. It was some day in, I don't know the exact date, but it was some week of Parshat Noah. But I said, I'm done. I'm going back to the way it was at the beginning with Eden. And if God expected us to, I'm going to try to live up to that expectation. And so for me, that was the final, the Torah portion was the final straw. So when people say, how has the Torah changed your life? On a basic level, well, every day not every day, but almost every day I eat. And what happens to me? I don't eat animals. The only reason I eat animals before was because I loved eating them. And I did. I loved eating animals. There was not a day that went by that I didn't eat an animal. I was a big meat eater. And I don't think people thought I'd actually ever be able to give up animals, but I did. And I said, the only reason I'm eating them is because I like eating them. I know it's not good for me. It's not helping my health. It's not helping my frame of mind. It's not, if God doesn't want me, if God didn't intend for human beings to, my body wasn't built to eat a lot of animals. Why am I doing this? Only because I like it. And so I decided I'm going to take control of my body. And my not really my body, but my mind. And that's what I did. So there you have it. And that's why to this day, and I made veggie chili tonight for my family, and they all enjoyed eating veggie chili with fake meat and fake chorizo mixed in, and God saw that I was eating chili and said it was good. I said it was good. I don't know if God saw it, but I liked it. So this is a real issue for me, though, and it is from the Torah that I took on that way of life of not eating animals anymore. So that's the command. Eat them, but that's what's going to happen. And so it's not until Noah's time, 10 generations it took essentially for human beings to be given permission to eat. So God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and your offspring to come. And every living thing that is with you, birds and cattle and every wild beast as well, all that have come out of the ark, every living thing on earth. I will maintain my covenant with you, and never again shall all flesh be cut off by waters of flood. And never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. So here, folks, we get a version of the flood that there is not going to be another flood. It doesn't say that God will ever, and again,
And there hasn't been.
and there hasn't been. And so God says, don't worry about that anymore. You don't have to worry about a flood anymore. Again, how do people deal with that? Well, I don't know, but I will tell you this. One of the things we know is that God basically tells humanity, you don't have to worry about this anymore. You don't have to worry about a flood anymore. And that's hopeful. That's hopeful. Because God says, I will put this sign as a covenant between me and you and every living creature with you for all ages to come. And again, that word dorot, all the generations. I've set my bow in the clouds, and it shall serve as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. And that is the word brit, the covenant, the same word we use for the covenant sign, the brit. This is a covenant. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living creature among flesh, so that the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures, all flesh that is on earth. That, God said to Noah, shall be the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh. So, the covenant of the rainbow. That's a covenant. The word's used several times.
Mhm.
A covenant. It's a sign. It's an agreement. What do we have to do? Well, we don't have to do much in this covenant. Really, pretty much, it's God seeing it and saying, you know what? There's rain, and then there's rain. And I'm never going to allow that rain to come down on the earth. Never enough that's going to destroy everything. So people, again, every culture had a flood story. Our flood story has an important message at the end of it, which is don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. There's not going to be another one. It's a nice message. It's a nice message. Doesn't mean that things are going to be easy for humanity. It doesn't mean that you're not going to find other ways to mess with yourselves, but I'm not going to do it. As much as you see a lot of rain happen one day, it's not the flood.
And even when the monsoons come in India, they know it's going to end. And it's a lot of rain and it's for a long time, but they know it's going to end.
Yeah. And people around the world have been inspired by this story of the rainbow, right? And it's used as a symbol and as the knowledge of
Good luck.
this story everywhere, right? this story has this message. The rainbow became a symbol for so many cultures of hope, right? Of possibility and of, again, knowing that as bad as it is, there'll be an end to the storm. So that's a important message and one of hope. And then, interestingly, we get to what happens now to the family. So let's read. Sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japhet. Ham being the father of Canaan. So right away we're told, just so you know, Ham is the ancestor of Canaan, who is your enemy and is the inhabitor of the land of Israel before you. We know, again, right off the bat, well, why is it telling us that? It's going to be part of the story. So these were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole world branched out. Noah, the tiller of the soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk, and he uncovered himself within his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japhet took a cloth, placed it against their backs, and walking backward, they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way, so they did not see their father's nakedness. So Ham tells the brothers that their father's naked, and they go in and place the cloth back over him, and they don't even look at him when he's naked. When Noah woke up from his wine and learned what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers." And he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Let Canaan be slave to them. May God enlarge Japhet, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be a slave to them." That's the story of Ham and Canaan in particular. Now, I will tell you that this is obviously problematic because this line allowed Canaanites to be slaves. Now, initially, Canaanites were allowed to be slaves to the Jewish people. To some extent, the Torah tells us why they're allowed to be our slaves, because of this horrible thing that Ham did. Now, again, Ham is the ancestor to other kids too, not just Canaan. Why is Canaan singled out? Well, again, Canaan was the one that we interacted with, but Ham is also the ancestor of the Egyptians, also the ancestor of the people of Libya and of Sudan and of at least part of Africa. This line, folks, let Canaan be a slave to them, was the justification for Africans being slaves for thousands of years. That was the justification. Was the Hamitic, the curse of Ham, the curse of, really here, it's not all of the Hamites, it's Canaan in particular, Canaan. But that is the curse. And what's interesting is that because Shem and Japhet both work together to preserve their father's integrity and dignity, they are blessed. And it says that Japhet will be dwelling in the tents of Shem. Now, what's interesting about this is that this is actually, when we talk about lines in the Bible that are important for how we understand our modern age, understand that this line has been taken to literally mean that the reason why Europeans and Caucasians are protected by Israel or by the relationship to Shem is that Noah says that Japhet, the ancestor of the Greeks and the Europeans, is that he's blessed to be in the tent of Shem. And there were people who interpreted this to mean that when Europe became Christian they entered into the tents of Shem, Japhet, again. And we'll see it in one moment. We'll see the peoples that come out of these three sons. So Japhet is essentially kind of like going to come into under the protection of Shem. And that's one of the ways that Christians understand, or European Christians in particular, understand history, and that they are blessed to come into the tent of Shem. What else is happening in this? We don't know. The rabbis interpreted this to mean that it wasn't just seeing him naked, that Ham, or that Canaan actually, Ham, Canaan's dad, actually molests his father. That he doesn't, that when it says he uncovers his nakedness, that it's a little bit more graphic than that. That is not just looking at it, it's a euphemism for that he molested his father. There's even a possibility the rabbis gave that he castrated his father. That's a pretty big stretch, you'd say, right? Doesn't seem to be much justification from just the uncovering the nakedness. But it gets back to this idea that when God says, be fertile and multiply, that Ham thinks, oh, wait a second, my dad's going to have more kids now. And then I lose my inheritance if he has more kids. So let me make sure he doesn't have more kids. Or maybe he either does something to him to make sure he can't do that anymore, or he tries to encourage the brothers. That when he goes out and tells the brothers, hey, look, our father's naked in there, that's what he's kind of hinting at. Let's make sure that our father can't procreate. No matter what, it's a pretty big intergenerational curse and blessing. Folks, there's another issue here too, which is Noah gets drunk right away. And the rabbis definitely point out that Noah, again, in an example of maybe behavior that's not righteous or relatively righteous. How do we know that Noah isn't somebody we should be emulating as a role model? The first thing he does when he gets out of the ark is not the first thing, but he gets drunk and he loses control. It's another thing that the rabbis point out about Noah. So it says that Noah lived after the flood 350 years. So again, we're back into the 900 range, right? All the days of Noah came to 950 years and he died. So, anybody have any questions about the flood? Because we're done with the flood. Anybody? I don't want to move on from the flood without people getting in with any things that are important, or that you have an insight or something you want to add to it, because that's the flood. The next chapter, this last part of the portion, is it's the generations that come out of the three sons. My three sons, we would call it. These are the lines of Shem, Ham, and Japhet. The sons of Noah. Sons were born to them after the flood. So it says there specifically here that their sons were born after. The descendants of Japhet: Gomer, Magog, Madai, Yavan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tiras. These are all ancestors of European peoples. Some of them we know exactly where they are. Some of them we don't. And it's not like real far away Europe. It's probably not past Turkey or Greece, Mediterranean area. But one of them we know for sure where it is. This one right here, Yavan. This is Ionia. This is Greece, ancient Greece. So Yavan is the word that we still use for Greece, even today, in Hebrew. Yavan is the Greece. So it's the word for Ionia in Hebrew, Yavan. Now, the descendants of Gomer are Ashkenaz, Ripha, and Torgama. Now, what is this talking about? You do recognize the word Ashkenaz. That's where we get the word Ashkenazi from. The rabbis interpreted Ashkenaz as being France, that part of Europe, Central Europe or Western Europe, that they believed Ashkenaz referred to maybe that part of the world. It's more likely today, we assume that when it says Ashkenaz, that this actually might be talking about the Scythians who lived in Turkey and kind of in the Caucasus at this point. We're not sure, but again, we're not really sure where these areas are, most of them. Yavan, as I said, that was Japhet's son. His sons are Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these maritime nations branched out. These are the descendants of Japhet by their lands, each with its language, their clans, and their nations. Now, we know, folks, that these lands, Tarshish, Kittim, Dodanim, these are maritime cities and places where people, during the time of the Bible, were important areas, in maritime areas. And Kittim, we assume, is modern day Cyprus. Tarshish is mentioned in the story of Jonah. It's either Tartessus in Turkey, Tarsus, which is where Saul in the Christian Bible, later known as as Paul, is from Tarsus, or it is or it's an area. Tarsus also was the name of the city of Cadiz in Spain. That was a Carthaginian port all the way back to those times. So we're not sure, but these are all maritime outposts of Aegean peoples. And especially Kittim, Cyprus, was one of those places. And again, these are maritime nations, and that's what it says. Maritime nations. Ones that are Hagoyim, which is island nations, the island peoples. Now we get to the descendants of Ham, which are the African peoples. Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. Now, Mitzrayim, you know where that is. That's Egypt, right? Put is the area in modern day Libya, and Cush is the area south of Egypt, of modern day Egypt, or the southern part of Egypt, and into the area of Sudan. It's also, again, when we talk about Cushites, we're talking about the Ethiopians in modern day Israel and in Africa. You know what kind of sub-Saharan Africa is called in Israel, which is Cush. Okay. And of course, Canaan, which is the land of the Canaanites, which interestingly, the Bible says is connected more to Africa than it was to the Asian peoples. Which, by the way, the Canaanites were very influenced by the Egyptians, though we don't think that they were Hamitic peoples. I don't want to say Hamitic peoples, but that's what they called them, the African side. We do think the Canaanites were actually closer genetically to us. But the descendants of Cush are Sheba, which is again, or Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabteka. The descendants of Rama were Sheba and Dedan, which again, this Sheba is the Queen of Sheba, part of Northwest Africa or Yemen, that area, either Ethiopia or Yemen. And then it says, Cush begot Nimrod, who was the first man of might on the earth. He was a mighty hunter by the grace of the Lord. Hence the saying, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter by the grace of the Lord. So Nimrod is a guy we only get a couple lines about in the Bible, but probably was really well known mythologically. The rabbis kind of say that he's a great warrior king, but also a very bad guy, a scary guy. They actually say he's still alive during the time of Abraham, and he tries to destroy Abraham. in the Midrash, not in the Bible. This is all we get about him in the Bible. But the rabbis were astounded by this guy and gravitated to the myth of Nimrod. Now we get the mainstays of his kingdom were Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. From that land, Ashur went forth and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Ir, Calah, and Resen between Nineveh and Calah. That is the great city. Now that says that the descendants of Nimrod, even though Nimrod was a Cushite, he ends up building all the way out into Babylon, to Akkad, into the ancient Near East that included the Mesopotamian areas. So again, we don't know that like by archaeology, but this is a story that there were actually African outposts inside Mesopotamia. And here we have Mitzrayim begot the Ludim, the Anamim, the Lechabim, and the Naphtuhim. These are all Egyptian peoples. The Pathrusim, the Kasluhim, the Kaphtorim, whence the Philistines came forth. So according to this, the Philistines actually come out of, in this version, come out of the Egyptians, where in reality they probably again came out of the Kittim. They came out of the Yavan, the people from Yavan, the Aegean peoples. But here, at least, there was a blending between the Egyptians and the Philistines in places like Kaftor, which is also on modern day Crete. It's also part of modern day Aegean islands, or again islands that were Greco Hellenized islands. So it's Kaftor is mentioned a few times in the Bible as again an Aryan outpost of Philistine, definitely Philistines, but again where they came from. It says Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn Het, and the Jebusites and the Amorites and the Girgashites and the Hivites and the Archites and the Sinites, the Arvadites and the Zemarites and the Hamathites. Afterwards, the clans of the Canaanites spread out. The original Canaanite territory extended from Sidon as far as Gerar, near Gaza, and as far as Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, near Lasha. These are the descendants of Ham according to their clans and languages, by their lands and nations. So again, according to this, the Canaanite territory went into modern day Israel, obviously, land of Israel, but also, especially along the coast, all the way to Lebanon. Sidon, obviously Gaza, we know where that is, and Sodom and Gomorrah are by the Dead Sea. And of course, we know about them later. These are Canaanite cities. And it includes all those other people that are, again, according to this, the Jebusites, the Amorites are all Canaanite peoples. What's interesting, again, is that the Canaanites the Canaanites seem to be the ancestors of the Phoenician peoples, the ancestors, if you will, of the Carthaginians and the people of Sidon. There was an interaction, we know culturally, between the Canaanites and Phoenician. The Phoenicians were really the Canaanites who lived in Lebanon. So that's the Hamites. So we get the descendants of Japhet, the descendants of Ham, and now we get to our ancestors. The Semites, the descendants of Shem. That's where the word Semitic comes from. It comes from Shem. And here we go. And again, this is the last part of the Torah portion. Well, you'll see the last part, which we're going to get to. Sons were also born to Shem, the ancestor of all the descendants of Eber, an older brother of Japhet. These are the descendants. It's interesting, by the way, that it says he's the older brother of Japhet, that he's, if not the oldest brother, he's older than Japhet, but they save him last. The descendants of Shem, Elam, Ashur, Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. The descendants of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. And Arpachshad begot Shelah, and Shelah begot Eber. 2 sons were born to Eber. The name of the first was Peleg, for in his day the earth was divided. And the name of his brother was Yoktan. Yoktan begot Almodad, Sheleth, Hazarmavet, and Yerah, Hadoram, Uzal, and Dikla, Obal, Abimal, and Sheba, Ophir, Chavilah, and Yobab. All these were descendants of Yoktan. So again, according to tradition, maybe one of the reasons why Yobab might be Job. We don't know. We're going to be reading about Job next week on Tuesday morning class, but he seems to be a descendant of Shem through them. That somehow that's how they're related. The settlements extended from Mesha as far as Safar, the hill country to the east. These are the, and again, all of these other people are people that live in the Middle East, that live in Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran. These are the descendants of Shem according to their languages. These are the descendants, these are Noah's descendants according to their origins, by their nations, and from all these, the nations branched out over the earth. So that chapter 10 is the origins of humanity, if you will. Of course, it's not all of humanity, but it's the nations that Israel came in contact with in the ancient world. And so for them, explaining where these people came from was enough. Does it explain South America? Does it explain China? Does it explain? Maybe not. But it explained the people that they came in contact with, which quite frankly was all they were concerned with. And here we're going to read the last part of this portion today, the story of the Tower of Babel. Because yes, we read about the flood and then we read about the story of Babel. Those are the two big things that we read about in this week. And we're going to finish with this. But very interestingly, it's a very short story. Everyone on earth had the same language and the same words. And they migrated from the east and they came upon a valley in the land of Shinar and they settled there. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them hard." Brick served them as stone and bitumen served them as mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build us a city and a tower with its top in the sky to make a name for ourselves. Else we will be scattered all over the world." The Lord came down to the city, look at the city and the tower that man had built. And the Lord said, "If as one people with one language for all, this is how they have begun to act, then nothing that they may propose to do will be out of their reach. Let us then go down and confound their speech there. So they will not understand one another's speech." Thus the Lord scattered them from there over the face of the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why the story is called, that is why why it's called Babel, because the Lord confounded the speech of the whole earth. And from there, the Lord scattered them all over the face of the earth. And that is the story of the Tower of Babel. It's a 9-sentence story that captivates our imagination. What was it that these people built that made God so upset that God says, "I can't let them do this. I can't let them work like this"? Well, definitely, we don't think, we must take away from this that what they did was wrong. The rabbis point out that they do this to have a great name for themselves. They don't do it for the good of humanity. On the contrary, the rabbis say that these people were so intent on building the city that they didn't even care about human life. That the cost, the value of making a brick took over everything. And they said that when they were making the brick, that if a person fell into the mortar, and I mean into the brick making vat, if you will, where they were making the bricks, that they would just took the person and just they stomped them and made them part of the building. So the building was literally built with dead bodies too. Dead bodies made up the building. The people sacrificed essentially their humanity to build this tower. It's an explanation for why there are these amazing ziggurats all over the ancient Near East, not all over, but in this area of Tigris and Euphrates. And what do they represent? They represent humanity doing something, at least according to our tradition, that was not what God wanted. That it was literally trying to ascend to God and to be gods. And God didn't want people, as we know, they couldn't handle the power that God had. So God scatters the people and makes it so that they don't speak one language anymore. And so the takeaway from this clearly is Judaism teaches that God doesn't want everybody to speak the same language. God, there's a reason for it. And diversity is not a bad thing. We don't need everybody to speak the same language. It's good to have people doing different things. It's good that there are people who do one thing and do it, and do this, and some people do that. We don't need to have everybody doing the same thing. Any comments or questions or anything about Bavel, this Tower of Bavel, that people want to make mention of before we wrap up? Okay, we're going to finish with the last piece here, folks. And we go back to Shem, to that descendant of to Noah's son, who has a special line. We read about some of the Semites, but this is the line of Shem. Shem was 100 years old when he begot Arpachshad, 2 years after the flood. After the birth of Arpachshad, Shem lived 500 years and begot sons and daughters. When Arpachshad lived 35 years, he begot Shelah. After the birth of Shelah, Arpachshad lived 403 years, and he also had other sons and daughters. When Shelah lived 30 years, he begot Eber, the ancestor of the Hebrews. That's where we get the word Hebrew from. So Shelah was the ancestor of Eber. After the birth of Eber, Shelah lived 403 years and begot sons and daughters. When Eber lived 34 years, he begot Peleg. After the birth of Peleg, Eber lived 430 years and begot sons and daughters. And when Peleg had lived 30 years, he begot Reu. After the birth of Reu, Peleg lived 209 years, and he begot sons and daughters. When Reu lived 32 years, he begot Serug. After the birth of Serug, Reu lived 207 years, and he begot sons and daughters. When Serug lived 30 years, he begot Nahor.
You're dying younger and younger.
Exactly. And this is exactly what Joyce had asked before about the ages of the people. Well, God had said in last week's portion at the end, people shouldn't live more than 120 years. But it didn't suddenly wake up where they were only living 120 years. They start after the flood to live less and less and less. And so it goes from the generations to the point where we then get people living about 120 years. And that ideal living span that God thought was good enough for us, that we get to that. So you can see that there's it's not overnight. It gets progressively shorter. And so here we have Nahor, who's the ancestor of Terah. And he gives birth to Terah. And then it says, after the birth of Terah, Nahor lived 119 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And then there's Terah. He lived 70 years, and he begot Avraham. That is Avraham. That is our ancestor. Nahor and Haran. So you can see there's two Nahors. Nahor, who is Terach's father, and then Terach has a son whose name is Nahor. and then also Haran. Now, Nahor is an important guy. He's Avram's brother, and Nahor is the ancestor of, Rebecca,
Mm.
and also, therefore, of Rachel and Leah, because Rebecca's brother, Laban, is their father. So Nahor is an important guy. So is Avram, obviously, he's the most important. And then there's Haran. But here's the weird thing. It says this is the line of Terach. Terach begot Avram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran begot Lot. So that's Haran's son. Here's the weird thing. Haran died in the lifetime of his father Terach in his native land, Ur of the Chaldeans. Ur. Ur means city. And Ur Kasdim means in Ur of the Chaldeans, in that part of the Mesopotamian area. Okay. Now that means that Haran died young, really young.
Mhm.
And that's the interesting thing about this story, is that because Haran dies, Avram ends up taking care of his nephew Lot. And Lot becomes very important in the story. The next week's Torah portion, that Lot is essentially almost like an adopted son of Avram, his uncle. And that Lot is, for a time, essentially almost like, the line is going to go through Lot after his father died. He becomes Avram's responsibility. So here it says, Avram and Nahor took to themselves wives. The name of Avram's wife being Sarai, Sarah, and that of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. So it says that Nahor married his niece. Okay. And it says Sarai, on the other hand, was barren and had no child. Terach took his son Avram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Avram, and they set out together from Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. But when they had come as far as Haran, they settled there. Now that's confusing because Haran was the name of his son.
Mhm.
And it says when they got to Haran that they settled there. Well, that's either they named the city after the son, or it was a coincidence that they come to a place called Haran. But that area of Syria, Harun, is still called Haran. It's not, that city is still exist. City still exists in Syria. But more importantly, folks, Terah lived 205 years and he died in that city, Haran. Next week, we're going to continue the story. But folks, this is the important part that I want you to sit with and think about and come up with an answer if you have one. We always talk about Avram making this great journey to the land of Canaan. But the Torah tells us right here that with his sons, Terah started the journey to the land of Canaan. But he didn't get there. We don't talk about that, folks. We only talk with the first sentence where it says, God said to Avram, go to the land that I'm going to show you. Leave your father's house. But we never think about this story as a continuation of a journey. We always think that this is a fresh start for Avram, that he's going to start a whole new path. Not so. He is actually finishing the journey that his father started. And that's an interesting idea, and one that we don't talk a lot about. Some people don't even know that. They never hear that until they read it in the Bible, that it actually was Terah who started this journey. And I think it's something to think about because to some extent, we're on a path. And in some cases, that path, we feel that it's our own path. But oftentimes, we have to think about it for a second and wonder whether we didn't inherit a path. That the path that we are following or that we're guided on or that we feel called upon to do wasn't started by somebody who came before us. Maybe a father, maybe a mother, maybe a grandfather or grandmother. But oftentimes, this journey that we're on, we didn't start it. We were put in the direction even before we came into this world. So it's something to think about. Again, not necessarily the way you've ever thought about it before, but think about it, and think about if that relates to you at all. Think about if that journey that you're on wasn't, to some extent, started a little bit before you got into this world. All right, folks.
Wow.
Wrap up there, and a lot to think about tonight. We have destruction, but of course, it's not really about destruction. The easy thing to say is the flood story is about destruction. But I will tell you this, as you saw, it's not a kid's story. We always think about the story of Noah and the ark is the ultimate like story we teach kids. You know, I remember our kids had wallpaper that had the Noah's Ark on it. And it's one of those stories that's in all the kids' Bible books. It's a great story of, you know, people taking care of animals. It's not a kid's story. I mean, obviously there's parts of it that are definitely not for kids, especially what happens to Noah when he gets out of the ark. But think about it, folks. Think about what's really going on in that story. The cataclysmic moment where all of humanity is resting in one vessel.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to call it a boat, because it's really a floating piece of it's a bowl with a lid on it. That's a scary thing. That's a real scary thing to think about. And it's one that, again, I think this year has something to teach us, or hopefully gives us something to think about, that when we get out of this ark, what are we going to do to have hope?
What's also interesting is to this day, there are expeditions looking for remnants of the ark on mountains.
Yeah, and I always find that, I was always kind of found it fascinating, but I always thought it's kind of missing the point, because the story is clearly meant to teach us, again, why did we have a flood? You know, all these other cultures that, you know, taught these stories, the story at the end of it was always kind of like the gods were punishing us and you should be scared of God.
I always wanted to know what they did for fun on the boat, on the ark, if they played like shuffleboard or something like that.
Okay.
It would have been hard to play the license plate game on the ark. Or what do you see on another boat? Because there's no other boats. But in all seriousness, though, it's really scary. I mean, the idea that these people didn't want to get out of the ark.
They were frightened.
We don't teach that to the kids when we read this story. We don't reflect on the post-traumatic stress that these people were on. That what was it like to be one of Noah's sons or daughter-in-law after they get out? And again, a lot of people didn't like the Noah movie. I'm not promoting it. I'm not saying it's something to go out and watch. There's a lot of things in there that are, you know, strange and weird. But there is this interesting thing that they picked up on, or not they, Darren Aronofsky, who obviously is Jewish, but he picked up on. You couldn't have gotten out of the ark and just gotten back to business. You don't get out of the ark and just go, hey, well, we're out of the ark. Everything's good now. It must have taken some time. And even after time, do you ever recover from that kind of situation? How do you ever feel safe again? And again, we do have the wonderful line that God puts that rainbow, that Noah and his family and us, when we look up, shouldn't be afraid. But, you know, maybe we really need to find those rainbows, because when you're scared, there's not a lot that again, it's hard to get people out of that feeling of fear, whatever caused it, whether it was physical abuse or mental abuse, or, you know, being incarcerated or being held hostage, or whatever it is. It's scary. So Yeah, as much as, again, this is the ultimate kid story, it's not. It's actually the opposite. It's the ultimate frightening story. So I think that's one of the things that people didn't like about that Noah movie was that he focused on those really frightening, scary elements to it. And people didn't like that because they like the idea that people get out of the ark and there's a rainbow and that's enough.
Mhm.
It was helpful, right? It was important. It was vital that they know that God's not going to destroy the world. But that doesn't, it's not magic, and it turns off the fear. And even if you have hope, there's still going to be some scary times. So I hope we're not scared. I hope we help each other. I hope we as a society will get together and not politicize the aftermath of this whenever we're ready for the aftermath, which I hope, God willing, will be soon, that we'll be looking at this as a history lesson. Folks, again, stay healthy and don't be part of more illness. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
You
Rabbi.
take care too.
Thanks, everybody.
You too. We need
Thanks.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Stay
See you
healthy.
soon. We'll see you soon.
Love you all.
Love you, Joyce.
Thank you.